I wanted to talk about something that I call second order thinking. And the idea here is that we have two types of thinking. We have automatic thoughts that just pop up. We can't control them. They're just part of the brain. And they can have all kinds of different content, from being very mundane to being troublesome and difficult, part of mental health disorders, whether it's anxiety, depression, obsessions, worries, other difficult thoughts. And then we have a second order thinking. We have analytical thinking that we do in response to the automatic thoughts. And this second type of thinking we can control. So we know we can control it because when we practice in mindfulness and meditation, if we're staying on an object like the breath or the body or sounds, whatever it might be, when our mind wanders off, it's going into this second order analytical thinking after a first order automatic thought. And we can let go of that and come back to the breath, come back to the focus. So it's the simplest way to realize we can let go of that. Now, sounds easy, but it's not easy to do, especially the more difficult the primary thought is, the automatic thought, and then how addictive the second order thinking is in terms of trying to solve it, trying to protect us, trying to predict danger. So, we've got many ways of conceptualizing these second order thoughts. One simple way is to think about worry for the future, judgment for either ourselves or the outside world, and rumination about the past. So, there are many other ways you can conceptualize this. You have analysis, you have discursive thinking, you have problem solving, you have hopelessness, you have self-judgment, other judgment, external world judgment, you have worry. And this is an ancient idea as well as being studied by modern science. In modern science, we know that those automatic first order thoughts we can't control, and the more we try and control them, we get the paradoxical effect of more of them. So, for example, if I tell you not to think about your favorite meal, whatever you do, don't think about that delicious starter, main or pudding, whatever you enjoy, just keep it out of your mind. You might be able to for a bit, but you can't do it for long. Whereas if I tell you now to start thinking about the ingredients and how to cook it, you can start that process up and then you can stop it and focus on something else. Very easy to do with a delicious meal, although the thought of the meal will still pop up, but the planning of it can be stopped. It's difficult to do this if it's more around real deep anxiety, worry, depression, things like that. And this is an ancient idea that was talked about in early meditation traditions, like in Buddhism, for example. They have this idea of Propontia, which is, obsessive, self-reflexive thinking, mental proliferation, elaboration, reification. Different ways it's been translated, but this idea that we grab hold of thoughts and we run with them and we let them spin round and round and round and round. In a way, I think about the idea about non-judgmental awareness in mindfulness as awareness without analytical second order thinking. So we are just aware of what's happening, even if it's automatic thoughts, automatic judgments. We're just aware of them without adding that second level of thinking. So this is talked about in lots of psychological traditions as well. In acceptance and commitment therapy, this is talked about by Russ Harris in his idea of the choice point, where we have a difficult situation, the automatic thoughts and feelings it triggers, and then we can either take actions that take us away from the type of life we want to live or towards the type of life we want to live. The away moves, he includes thinking strategies in there. So all kinds of different thinking strategies, everything from distraction to analysis paralysis to worry to rumination to self-attack, to planning to daydreaming, or kind of fantasy thinking about the life we want to live and the holiday we want to go on. All of these things he puts in the away moves, and the idea here is we can actually drop those away moves and start doing the towards moves. You see it in cognitive behavioral therapy. You see it in all the mindfulness-based traditions will talk about this. Kirk Strozahl in ACT talks about distancing as a strategy to unhook from this second order thinking. So detachment and distancing he talks about. So this idea of detached awareness, detached mindfulness, is we don't add in that second order thinking. In Adrian Wells' metacognitive therapy, lots of people have explored and worked on this, and I think it could be incredibly helpful for all mental health challenges, really. So it's worth thinking about the function of this second order thinking. If we can get a sense of the function, it becomes easier to drop it. So what is it either giving to us, or what is it getting rid of? Giving us things we want, or taking away pain that we don't want. Often it feels like problem solving that is going to come up to a solution. The problem is that it gets excessive and starts looping in on itself and actually never leading to action, whereas problem solving, we analytically think through and then plan and take action. Rumination, worry, analysis paralysis, judgment doesn't lead to action, it just loops back on itself. It's trying to keep us safe, it's trying to make us better, become a better person, not get thrown out of the tribe, achieve more. Rumination is about learning from the past. There's evidence that worry is about avoiding feelings, so we get up into the worry loops and then we don't feel, there's not as much activation in the brain around the embodied feelings, so it protects us from fear and sadness and pain and other things we don't want to feel, and other functions as well. So if we can get a sense of why our mind is doing that, either trying to help us learn, trying to help us do better, trying to help us spot dangers in the present, if we can get a sense of that, then we're kind of more accepting and more compassionate towards it. Another level of this second order thinking is actually checking. So internally checking a feeling to see if it's still there. You see this in depression, you see this in anxiety, you see this in obsessive compulsive disorder, depersonalization. It's also found in health anxiety. It's a big part of health anxiety and somatic obsessions. There's an element where we're constantly checking our internal subjective experience to see if it's right, to see if the thing we don't want has gone, to try and understand what it means. And that second order check-in is something we can also drop, like the second order thinking. Now, it sounds easy to drop this second order thinking and check-in, and actually some people find it very easy. So some people become aware of this concept and they have good mental awareness and metacognition and the ability to control their mind, and they can just put it down and focus on something and kind of get on with things. But if you have any deficits in your prefrontal cortex that might go along with anxiety and depression, it can be much harder to do this. A lot of this second order thinking is on autopilot, sort of unconscious. You don't really notice it most of the time, so it's quite hard to drop it. And this is where mindfulness can be incredibly helpful. If we can at least start to be aware of this type of thinking, to be able to watch the automatic thoughts, to know if it's helpful to pursue them and to take action in the world. And if we're in any doubt, assume that it's not useful to pursue them. And, to catch our mind doing this. So if we practice any mindfulness practice where we're noticing when we get distracted and coming back to a focus point, we'll start to learn about this second order thinking and how to let go of it. even if you just observe it, what a lot of people find, if you just observe it, it will quieten down on its own because you're not feeding it, you're just noticing and observing. So as with many of the mindfulness practice, this ability to watch and observe our mind, watch and observe our body, notice what our attention is doing, is a really good start. And sometimes people think it is just easy to drop this, to stop doing this. Like if you're aware of yourself doing it, you can see that it doesn't help you, then you could just drop it. But it has been trained over many, many years, often decades. So it's hard, it takes practice to drop this. And it sounds a lot like distraction, but the difference with distraction is the framing is that if we focus on something hard enough, the automatic thoughts will drop as well, and the second order thinking, and we'll just be in it. And that can happen when we're not too stressed and not too disturbed. But the more difficult and problematic a mental health challenge is, the harder it is to distract. You can't just put your mind on something else. So this is different. We are learning to observe, detach and notice, and then refocus on something that we care about, that matters, and letting those automatic thoughts just pop up all the time as we're doing the thing we care about or doing the mindfulness practice. It's the second order thinking we're practicing dropping. So if we want to think about some practices and ways of working with this, I think the most important starting point is connecting with your motivation to change this. So we realize the function, what it's trying to do, and that it's not actually helping. Short term it might be reducing a bit of pain, but long term it's making it more difficult and making our life worse, and there's more of the problem we're trying to get rid of. So we need to get that motivation to change this, because it is hard. Typically what people find when they stop this second order thinking around anxiety or depression is that you get a lot of embodied feelings that are difficult. So you get higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of sort of depressive feelings, lack of motivation, pain, tiredness, numbness, detachment. You might get a bit more of that at first, because your brain is trying to get you to keep doing this thing that it thinks is helpful. And so we need a motivation to change and to do something different. If you're really deep in a mental health disorder, you feel like putting down these mental habits is taking your life or other people's life in your own hands, really putting people at risk, because it feels like it's the only thing protecting your family from the thing you're worried about, or the obsession that you're trying to keep at bay, or your own depressive thoughts, trying to keep them back. So we get the motivation first. We think about the cost of these habits, the time it takes up, the fact that it actually doesn't solve the problem. And then once we have a sense of the cost, we move into the values and the goals, values congruent goals, and the motivation of the life we want to have instead of this. So where do we want to put that mental attention and energy? What kinds of activities do we want to do? How do we want to treat ourselves and other people? What kind of skills do we want to develop? Mastery, self-efficacy, attention. We bring in self-compassion and compassion for others. So we get this sense of a motivation and a reason to do something different. Then we want to work the defusion tools from mindfulness and acceptance traditions, acceptance and commitment therapy. So we've got some of them on this site, but the very simplest idea is to notice this happening and then refocus. So notice and refocus. And it could be refocusing on a mindfulness practice, or just refocusing on life and something you want to do and that matters, or whatever you're doing in the present moment if you don't know what matters. So notice and refocus. If that's really difficult, then notice and name and refocus. So say, here is worry, here is rumination, here is analysis paralysis, here is the inner critic. I am noticing thinking, I am noticing worry, whatever naming process works. You could name the story. You could say it's the I've got to predict all the threats story. I've got to predict everything that could go wrong story. So, I'm going to fail story. I'm not good enough story. Whatever you could take, however you could take that group of thoughts and collectively give them a story title. Then we want to use our present moment skills, so really being focused in what we're doing with an expansive awareness, so the awareness lets in the automatic thoughts, and it notices the tendency to go for these second order thoughts or the urge to do it, and it's focused in on what you're doing. So you're present, you're engaged. Any thinking you're doing is task focused, is helping and supporting you do whatever you're doing. Observing process, we talked about it. At least if we can observe it, we can learn to start to drop it. This is a bit like, mindful approaches to giving up smoking. One of the first stages is to smoke really mindfully, to slip mindfully at the habit you're trying to change. And in doing that, you can realize it doesn't deliver quite what you're hoping it would. So as you watch yourself go into these thought loops, you can see that actually you feel quite agitated and it isn't really helping you in the way you would hope it would. So mindfully observing this process often, and for myself, as I did that, you stop the second order thinking anyway, because you're just observing. So you notice the first automatic thoughts, and then you're not adding that proliferation, that Propontia, as they say in Buddhism. And the same with checking. All of this applies to checking. At least watch your mind, checking your body, checking your mind, checking your experience, and then you can start to stop that checking. As I said, often it's very autopilot, unconscious at first, so we've got to get the awareness in there and notice it. Do supportive thinking in parallel, so task-focused thinking about what we're doing, planning ahead, using thoughts that support what we're doing, like you're playing chess and your thinking moves ahead, you're predicting what they're doing. So useful thinking that helps you be better at what you're doing. And we can use value-based thinking and goal setting and action planning, and most importantly, self-compassion. So this compassionate inner voice that supports and motivates and helps us through something. The next one is actions, a focus on action. So if in doubt, get moving, get active, carry that second order thinking with you as you start to focus on actions, even if it's just tidying your house, doing a boring chore, something you have to do, right through to mastery and developing a skill, something enjoyable, pleasurable, or at least you used to enjoy it if you don't now because of the depression or anxiety. So getting active, getting focused, practicing this in action can be really a great way to do it. Social connection, many people find being with other people is about the best way to put this second order thinking down, this worry, this self-attack, this rumination. So you notice those thoughts pinging up, but you really focus on the people you're with, what you're doing, what you're talking about, what you're listening, and you keep refocusing, like that first defusion skill, notice and refocus on the people you're with. And then, sometimes those first order thoughts are important and they tell us stuff about our life. So we do want to check in from time to time and notice what they're telling us. And then we want to move into problem solving. So problem solving, sometimes called worry time. I don't particularly like that term because it makes it sound like you're worrying, whereas this is actually, this is focused, useful, productive thinking. So you set a timer, you take those first order thoughts that have been worrying you or reflecting on your life, and you brainstorm the ideas, the solutions, and then you do some pros and cons analysis, doing it with a lot of compassion, bringing in kindness. Then you choose an option to go for, you action plan it, what are the steps to take, and then you move out into action. So you do this within a timed period, you do it on paper, you do, brainstorm every idea you can, do some analysis within a time frame, and then the difference here is that it leads to action. And if in doubt, if you feel that second order worry or rumination is starting up, get active. It's better to get active and get the information from your present moment experience, whether you're doing the right approach or not. So I hope there's some useful ideas here with this second order thinking. Let me know what you think. You find this in all kinds of mental health challenges, depression, anxiety. So if we think about the two core mental health challenges that are part of most mental health disorders, anxiety and depression. Anxiety, we can have these intrusive anxious thoughts, and then we do the worry in response to it. We do the catastrophizing, the predicting the worst. Also with anxiety, we have the anxious feeling and then the checking of what's going on. That can drive panic and depersonalization. We're sort of looking for how we're feeling in the moment, and that analysis and focus amplifies what we're feeling and makes it stronger. With depression can be many different things, but one way is we have intrusive thoughts that are either attacking ourselves, so the inner critic, or the external world and our future, so sort of hopelessness, or intrusive memories from the past and things that went wrong, setbacks and goals we didn't achieve. And then we move into ruminative thinking that kind of asks why, goes over and over analyzing what happened, or agrees with how bad our life is, does this negative comparison to either our life before or other people's lives, or it loops around in this sort of hopelessness type of thinking, or meaninglessness and lack of purpose and connection to life and what we're doing. So lots of different versions in depression, but the same second order thinking that adds into it. Now, if we drop that second order thinking in those examples, we have just anxious feelings, maybe some anxious automatic thoughts, and we can let those come and go in their own time. With depression, we have maybe sadness, we have maybe loneliness, isolation, a painful feeling, but then it comes and goes in its own time, and we're not adding all those layers that take us into numbness, detachment, and depression. So I hope there's some useful ideas there. Give some of these practices a shot. We've got other videos on the channel exploring this, so go back and look. And let me know how you get on, and